Hey, sorry about that. Sorry, there's a part two. That was not expected. I accidentally did something, and I figured instead of wasting the first 10 minutes and doing it over, that I would just start with a part two. So if you've shown up for this part, good for you. I'm also going to be fascinated to see how many people uh, look at the first 10 minutes and then decide to keep going. Anyway, so what Jesus decides to do is to form a team. And it's an interesting thing when you think about that. He doesn't need a team. He doesn't do that because the people that he's about to call are more equipped than he is. I think part of what we assume, and I think rightly assume, is that a good part of the reason why he decides to have disciples in the first place is so that he has people who are prepared and ready to be the church after he's gone. Obviously, that makes sense. You're not wrong in thinking that, and I don't think I'm wrong in thinking that either. But I think he's also doing something, I don't want to say for himself, but also as an example for how we are to live. Jesus spent a lot of his time feeling alone. I think for a lot of different reasons. One, because he's, the Messiah and his family was not. And second, I think it's because, he had this beginning that I imagine if he had siblings, and there's some evidence that he at least had siblings, or, that James is his sibling, but he's, of course, the eldest. That there's a sense of my experience, where I'm from, who I am, is just different than yours. Not only was I meant for something else, but I have lived a different experience, and my origin is different than yours. And I don't think about that often enough, especially when it comes to James. I think often about the fact that, what was it like to be the brother of Jesus, and try to, live up to that. I think I've joked before and said something like, imagine what it was like to be James and constantly having to say to your parents, you just think Jesus is perfect. And that's a bad joke, but it's one that I've told before. Well, the other element to that is that I wonder if James was the younger brother of Jesus, how much younger? Was he born in Egypt? Was he born as soon as they got back into Nazareth? Either way, the experience that they had, I think, was different. Different memories, a different story, a different origin. And so Jesus just lives, I think, a life that had to have felt very solitary. And so not only does he feel comfortable in those times, there are some people who just feel very at ease being, on their own and being quiet and whatever, which is clearly how Jesus gathered himself and found strength. But he also valued relationships. And I think what's fascinating about the people that he talks with is, Peter and Andrew and all the other disciples, what we usually say about them is that he chooses them because that's what God does. God chooses those who we would not expect, right? People like Moses or like David, people who are on the fringe, people who we don't associate with greatness. They're the ones that become great. And we talk about the disciples in much the same way, that he chooses fishermen or tax collectors or whatever because those are the people you wouldn't expect. And I think that that's probably true. But what I don't really associate is that those are probably the people that Jesus felt the most connected to. Jesus was poor. So he hung out with people who were like him. But he was also someone who knew what it meant to be on the outside of something. My guess is that everyone in Egypt knew that he was that kid from Israel or that kid from Bethlehem. He spoke differently. Maybe he didn't speak the language at all. He just knew what it was like to do that. And he was probably reminded of that all of the time. And then, oh, by the way, he's the Messiah. He doesn't know what to do with himself. And so that I think changes the way that I see the process of Jesus looking for disciples. He wasn't necessarily just looking for people who are outsiders because that's an example that God often sets in people like Moses or whoever, but also because those are the people he wanted to spend time with. He didn't know what to do with the people who had money. He didn't know what to do with people who were in a certain social economic class. But he knew what to do with fishermen. His dad was, he was from up. He knew that part. He got that part. And maybe the disciples were just his kind of people. And the same can be said, I think, for the ways that we see Jesus reach out to women in leadership, to people who are outside of Israel. We don't give enough, at least I don't give enough kind of credit or thought to the fact that that's who Jesus was. That's what his beginning told him to look out for. That's the way that he knew how to enter into the world. It's hard to imagine sometimes, or hard to remember sometimes, that the story of Mary and Joseph being unwed and what happened and how he came to be, that was a story that probably stuck with them for a long time. Maybe it was something they got a fresh start in Nazareth to do, but my guess is that enough people knew enough people that enough people knew that story. And I think that had to have been a big part of the way that he entered into the world. And so when he gets to his disciples and he's choosing them, and he says, look, you do this, you fish for fish, but I'm going to help you fish for people. I'm going to help you make sure that other people feel as loved and included and cared for as I've always wanted to be. And I guess I hope that maybe Jesus was able to find his own kind of family, his own kind of belonging with these 12. And that's I don't know. I've often thought, or it's been said often, and I contemplate it. How is it that these disciples joined Jesus so quickly? You've probably heard that in a sermon or something. I've certainly preached on it at some point. Why is it that that's true? And there are a lot of good reasons. The miracle, they saw this miracle in Jesus and they thought, well, this is something I gotta be a part of. But it could be that Jesus found people who felt a lot the same way like he did. We don't know all of Peter's story or Andrew's story, but maybe they felt a lot like they were kindred spirits, I guess is what I'm saying. And that was something that they all just sort of connected with. And so what does that tell us about the ways that we're supposed to interact with each other? Well, first it tells me that it shouldn't be surprising that we find kindred spirits in each other, and I think that's one of the things that I really value about church is, when we talk about people who are connected in a certain way, sometimes what we say is that, well, they have things in common. They grew up in the same place, or they like the same foods, or they like the same music, or play the same sports, whatever it happens to be. But there's people in the congregation at Northmont who on paper I don't really have almost anything in common with. We didn't grow up doing the same things. We had very different experiences, very different career paths. Our families weren't the same. We have a different relationship with friends or family or whatever. Like, all of those things are often true. But what we find, and it takes some time to do, what we find is that we have this connection. We are kindred spirits in another way. We've been hurt before in similar ways. We know same kind of pain. We know what it's like to feel like you're on the outside of something, or any number of things. What I find is that the people that I connect with are people who understand the struggle, I think, in a similar way, and are trying to work their way towards something else. And that's very meaningful for me. Even if on the outside we don't have as much in common. And I think that's a huge part of why I wanted to do this series, was because, by and large, the people at Northmont have a lot of different types of similarities. There's a lot of professionals or former professionals at Northmont. We don't all look the same, but a lot of us, at least are somewhere on the same part of the color wheel. There's some things that we can kind of draw on, and those are good things. Those are fine things. That's okay. It's pretty normal. But there are parts of the story that we don't know that take a lot of time to figure out. Does it really matter if you grew up vacationing in the same place that I did? Maybe not. But, do you know what it's like to go through addiction? Or do you know what it's like to have your parents be like X or Y? Or do you know what it's like to go through divorce? Or do you know what it's like to, those are the things that really take time. And that's what we can eventually see in each other. But it takes that next step. And I think sharing those moments and sharing those parts of ourselves that maybe we don't always share in the beginning, I think that's the part of church that really fascinates me the most. And I think if what makes Northmont someplace that can be unique, I think it comes in a genuine desire to be genuine. What if that was our mission statement? A genuine desire to be genuine. Because honestly, I don't think every church is, and I think you probably know that. And if that's what we accomplish, creating a genuine kind of community, then that's not bad. That's worth getting out of bed for, at least it is for me. And I think that's part of what you see in the Jesus story, at least in this part of it, is that Jesus was trying to be genuinely himself and surround himself with people who he felt like would get that, would honestly get that. People who weren't always on the inside, who he connected with, and then would be able to find ways of doing that for other people. And that took a lot of lessons. You know, Jesus had to spend a lot of time with his disciples, teaching them how to look for those moments when they happened. You know, the woman at the well, for instance, the disciples weren't like, oh, I know what it's like to be on the outside. I can help this person out. You know, I can see. You know, no. Jesus had to show them, because they were like, dude, don't do this, and he's like, no, we're gonna do this, and here's why. And that's a big part of the story. But maybe he wouldn't have felt like he could do that with disciples who, once they were given the opportunity, would actually take it. You know, maybe he felt like he couldn't do that with people who, you know, weren't open to learning what another person was going through, and so he chose people like that. Those are just my first thoughts. Anyway, thanks for being a part of this second part of First Look. Thanks for taking a walk with me as obviously the sun sets. I appreciate so many things about you that I probably don't say enough. And I'll see you next time for another First Look. Bye, y'all.